We're here today to honor the memory of Bill Kortum. On behalf of Lucy and the entire Kortum family, they wish to express their gratitude for your great outpouring of love and support, and for your being here today. A poem by Linda Ellis is often read at memorials as entitled The Dash. I shall not read the poem, but what it says is that on the headstone and memorial cards, there's a person's name, their date of birth, their date of death, and the two dates are connected by a dash, a small straight line. Although the dates are important, it's the dash which is significant, for the dash connects the two dates representing the life of that person and all the events which occurred during the dash. Today we have a number of people chosen by the family who will give remembrances of Bill Kortum's dash. Our first speaker, our congressman from this district, Huffman. He, as many other elected officials, were very familiar with the face of Bill Kortum. So, and Huffman, our congressman, welcome.
Wow, what a tribute to Bill Kortum to see such an impressive gathering here of community leaders, environmentalists, and elected officials. It sort of reminds me of the famous speech that John F. Kennedy gave to a group of Nobel Prize winners that dined with him in the White House one night. He said it was the most incredible collection of talent and human knowledge ever assembled at the White House, except when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. And so, with apologies to JFK, I'll say this to me looks like the most impressive gathering of talent and knowledge and leadership ever in Sonoma County, except when Bill and Lucy dined alone. I am deeply honored to have been asked by the family to speak to the political side of Bill's life. And Bill was very political. I mean that absolutely as a compliment. He knew that it was not enough to just care or preach about the environment. It wasn't even enough to personally get out there and clean up the environment, although he did that throughout his life and even into the final month of his life when he participated in those final weeks of his long battle with cancer in a coastal cleanup day. Bill knew that if you really wanted change, lasting change, you had to get in the political arena and win some elections. And he worked through the political process continuously for 6 decades to shape policies, laws, and institutions. His political work is going to continue for generations to come because he founded 2 environmental organizations, Sonoma County Conservation Action and a group that spun out of the Prop 20 coastal campaign that we now know as the California League of Conservation Voters, who are very focused on that political and electoral side of environmental protection. Bill not only understood the importance of politics, he actually seemed to like it. And I think that's something he might have inherited from his father, Max, who was the Democratic nominee for Congress in 1954 for the same North Coast congressional seat that Bill would go on and run for as the Democratic nominee in 1970, the same North Coast seat in Congress that I hold today. And so even though I'm not a member of the Kortum family, I sort of feel that by keeping this seat in safe Democratic hands, I'm doing a bit of family business. Bill was absolutely the best kind of politician because for him, it was about doing something, not being something. And holy cow, did he do things. Starting with his early days in Cotati when he drove big transformational changes. Things like helping secure the campus location for Sonoma State. Nice location we chose today, which is reflective of his good work there. Like creating Cotati's great centerpiece, La Plaza Park. And like the city of Cotati itself, which he fought to incorporate. Bill's unsuccessful run for Congress in 1970 tells us something very important about his character. Losses did not faze him. The great General George Patton once said, "I don't measure a man's success by how high he climbs, but by how high he bounces when he hits bottom." And Bill bounced really high. Without skipping a beat from his loss for Congress, he bounced right into California history by spearheading the campaign to pass Prop 20 and creating the most successful coastal protection agency in history, the California Coastal Commission. Two years later, he won a seat on the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, and then he had to bounce again because his strong environmentalism led to his recall in 1976. But over the years, no matter what title or what hat he wore, Bill just kept right on working on the same thing, protecting what he saw as the commons, our coast, our open spaces, parks, and the rural character that makes Sonoma County so special. And I could easily fill my remarks with simply reciting all of his accomplishments. There's so much material and it's so significant. But in our limited time, I just wanted to speak a little about the Bill Kortum I knew as a person, the man I regarded as a friend, advisor, a role model, and a source of great inspiration. And I'll tell you, I liked him immediately. I don't know if it was just his passion for the environment. I think it was more than that. I was impressed by the breadth and substance of this man. He had a great intellect, his political acumen, the fact that he was a real three-dimensional person with all these varied interests. I loved talking with Bill about our mutual passion for home winemaking. And over the years, we would share bottles of Syrah. And I got the better end of that deal because his wine was better than mine. I was so impressed that Bill had designed and built his own beautiful house there on Eli Road. Was there anything Bill couldn't do? He really was like our own Thomas Jefferson. And here's something else I loved, and this is something that some of my friends in Marin County may never understand. Here was a guy who lived right beside a quiet, abandoned railroad track and wanted the trains to come rolling back. Bill was the opposite of a NIMBY. He was an IMBY. I loved how when Bill Kortum supported something, he locked onto it like a pipe wrench. I worked with him on both of the ballot measures to pass the SMART train. And you just can't overstate the degree of his passion and commitment for making that happen. In fact, the former executive director of Sonoma County Conservation Action, Mark Green, told me how relentlessly Bill had pushed the board and staff, even though there were some internal debates about this, to take a prominent leadership role on SMART. And Mark credits Bill's tenacity for the more than 250,000 direct voter contacts SCCA made to build support for the SMART train. But I think what really makes Bill special was his humility. In politics, there are a lot of people that should be humble. But it is exceptionally rare to find someone, especially someone of Bill's talent and stature, with his amazing resume, with his legendary accomplishments, who is intrinsically modest, never boastful, who deflects personal accolades by praising and encouraging others. For those who put Bill on a pedestal, his philosophy was, don't look up to me, look with me. And that was his genius, gently persuading the people around him to do things that seemed impossible. That's how he saved the California coast. That's how he created impactful environmental groups and institutions. It's how he laid the most amazing guilt trip on me. So, in 2006, when Bill advocated that SCCA extend an endorsement to me in my assembly race, a guy from Marin of all places, he took a huge risk, and in fact, he upset some of his own colleagues. The fact is, I might not have won that assembly seat. I might not be in Congress today if he hadn't done that, because I was an NRDC attorney. I was running against better-known elected officials in a crowded field of candidates, and to make sure that voters knew that I was the environmental candidate, I had to sweep every environmental endorsement in the race. And SCCA was the last one, and given its great brand in Sonoma County, it was one of the most important. So what Bill did for me in 2006 was enough to have my eternal appreciation and loyalty, but he went on to do more. After I was elected to the Assembly, he and Lucy became regulars at my events. And it was always so uplifting for me to see them because Bill would just say the nicest things. He would talk about how glad he was I was in the Assembly and how proud he was of my environmental work. And I came to appreciate that Bill was never faint with praise. More than that, he artfully used praise and encouragement to motivate people. It's as if he figured out somewhere along the line that the same gentle techniques that a veterinarian uses to soothe and calm difficult animals and get them to do the right thing also works on politicians. Who knew? Bill not only made me feel good, he made me feel a huge sense of responsibility to prove myself worthy of his steadfast trust and support. So his master plan was working, and it came to a crescendo 3 years ago when I announced my campaign for Congress, and I had my first event with a group of Bay Area environmental leaders in downtown San Francisco. It was a cold and rainy night. The city was congested at rush hour, but that didn't stop Bill and Lucy from making the trip all the way from Petaluma and being there right on time. And as if that wasn't enough, later in the evening, Bill rose and he spoke to the group, and he said something I'll never forget because it was totally over the top. He said, "I've been waiting my entire life for a politician like Jared Huffman." Now, I am not telling you this because I think it's true. In fact, I am quite sure that Bill was being generous in his remarks and exaggerating. But I'm sharing it because it impacted me. I can't tell you how many times I found myself thinking about what I can do to live up to the trust and confidence Bill put in me. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this room is filled with dozens of people who had the same experience. People who at one time or another were fortified, inspired, and compelled by the heaping praise and gentle persuasion that was Bill's trademark. It may not be as tangible as the Land Trust or Coast Walk or other institutions that he created, but I think we have to add something to the long list of Bill's accomplishments. He was the founder of a secret society called the I Won't Disappoint Bill Kortum Club, and we are all members. As I was reflecting on what to say today, I did some outreach to other people in politics who'd worked with Bill to compare notes, and I found recurring themes, amazing consistency. So former Supervisor Mike Riley, for example, recalled how Bill was always the guy with vision and foresight, and he would start things out with a big idea, like protecting heritage roads in the general plan, and then get others motivated to work on it. And the Heritage Road program that emerged in the final general plan didn't have Bill's name on it, but everyone knew it was entirely Bill's idea. And I find it interesting that even those who were occasionally Bill's political adversaries had nothing but admiration and praise to share with me. For example, Petaluma Councilman Brian Sobel talks about when he first got on the council, Bill reached out and wanted to have a cup of coffee and a chat, and they did, and Bill was really polite and spoke to him about his views on all these issues and wanted to have another coffee and a chat, and they had several of these over the next few months. They agreed on some things, disagreed on others. Bill always picked up the tab. And finally, Bill said to Brian, "Brian, it appears I'm not going to be able to convince you of some things, and I can't afford any more coffee." What a class act. There's just one more thing that I want to say about the political side of Bill's life, and it's rather obvious. He had an indispensable, inseparable, incredible partner. Bill was usually the public face of their work, but people in Sonoma County understand that it was always Bill and Lucy, a power couple in every sense. So Lucy, I know that I speak for everyone here when I say thank you for sharing Bill with the world, and thank you for your own tremendous contributions to the legacy that we're celebrating here today. A few days ago, I joined with my colleague, Congressman Mike Thompson, who also thought the world of Bill, in authoring a statement in the Congressional Record honoring Bill and his remarkable life. We brought a framed copy of that today for the family, along with a flag that was flown over the United States Capitol in Bill's honor. These are small things that we need to do to honor such a great man and a great life. But I think much more meaningful than these tributes is how we go forward from here today with Bill's example in our hearts. Let's definitely honor Bill by pledging to do our part to carry on his work. Let's do more to protect our environment. Let's make that smart rail and trail project a huge success. Let's do as Bill said in his final days and skip the soup and get Lafferty open. But let's also honor Bill by doing more to lift up those around us, by giving more praise and taking less credit, and by remembering the value of simply being kind and respectful to the fellow travelers on this fragile blue planet we're trying to save. Thank you.
I remember many years ago, Bill talking about the need for an organization which would send canvassers into every Sonoma County precinct to solicit and mobilize voters. At the time, I thought it was a rather far-fetched dream. Well, that dream became a reality in the form of Sonoma County Conservation Action. It's 23 years old. And one of those early canvassers is currently the executive director of Sonoma County Conservation Council, Denny Rosatti. Denny.
Good afternoon, friends and family of Bill Kortum. It's very heartening to see so many people here today to show their support and love for Bill's memory and to Lucy and the family. Bill Kortum was about action. I'd like to do a brief exercise here in that spirit. Please take a moment to greet and meet your neighbor and tell them how you knew Bill. That is probably the wrong thing to do with a crowd this size, full of activists. I really haven't heard a room erupt like that in quite a while. I asked you to do that because we in this room are the ones that must carry Bill's vision forward, and we have some very big shoes to fill. Also, one of the grand ideas that Bill Kortum pushed was the idea of a neighbor-to-neighbor interaction to further environmental and social goals in the community. When Sonoma County Conservation Action started out, for the first 10 or so years, the door-to-door canvass was the primary organizing tool, and it still is, but Bill wanted to take it to the next level. Now, we had some ups and downs in implementing the Know Your Neighbor program, but by and large, the Know Your Neighbor program was a success, in large part thanks to Bill's persistent push to make it happen. I can't tell you how many times Bill would find his space to educate, lecture, frame, or share wisdom by starting out with a, look it. We have so from over on B Street in Petaluma show up, and they say, hey, I'm your neighbor, and I'm concerned about the upcoming election. If I were to describe Bill in 3 words or so, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the heck do I say here, because there's so many things to say about Bill Kortum, right? If I were to describe Bill in 3 words, not necessarily in this order, I would say Bill was an inventor. He was literally an inventor of dairy tools, was a woodworker, had a pretty amazing wood shop, and he always seemed to be tinkering with something, whether it was practicing his veterinary training, building a barn on the family ranch, and the man just seemed to ooze with creativity, ideas, and invention. Bill was also a social inventor, and this is probably how most of us in this room, I'm guessing, know Bill. Californians organized to acquire access to state tidelands organization, leading the Prop 20 campaign, and eventually co-founding the statewide policy organization and lobbying group California League of Conservation Voters, the Sonoma County Farmlands Group, Coast Walk California, Sonoma County Conservation Action are all among his great gifts to our community. Each of these were started by a handful or so of activists committed to ensuring public access to the commons and protecting the environment we all know and love here in Sonoma County and in California. Second, Bill was a mentor. I think one of the more remarkable things about Bill Kortum is that he was a mentor to so many people that he came across. Bill learned early on in his activism that he would be more effective and that it was necessary to have more people and institutions doing the good work. It was too much for any one person. When I first started staffing Bill at events, I was amazed that when the electeds were announced, this recalled county supervisor, who only served a couple years in office, always got the most and the longest applause. And mind you, I came to California in 2002, and I met Bill shortly after that, so I was catching up quite a bit. So I was, this was kind of an interesting thing for me. I'm going to miss those applause, and I bet you will too. I met Bill much later in his life, and I was a 25-year-old modern-day pioneer. Those were Bill's words. Only I didn't have a Conestoga wagon. I had a Subaru wagon. And I always felt a really strong spiritual connection to Bill and Lucy, mostly because of who they are, but also because of our decision, Kelly and I's, to stay in California, was made at the Bodega Dunes campground, a place that would have become a nuclear park or a fallout zone, heaven forbid, had Bill and his cohort not stood up to the big business and forged a grassroots movement to protect the environment and public access to the commons. Bill and Lucy never made Kelly or I feel inferior or lesser because of our age difference, and we very much hold them in our hearts as extended family. Bill had an uncanny ability to find strengths in people. I really don't think he cared that much about age or experience. He was more about moving the ball forward, protecting the county and coast that he felt so connected to as a youth and all through his life. Bill would have you buy into his ideas and philosophy, yet often you were left alone to move the agenda forward, because Bill had already moved on to the next fight and entrusted you to put the same passion and energy he would have if you were handling it himself. Bill, and I think you're going to hear some of these overlapping themes here today. Bill had a profound impact on my own personal growth, my professional growth, my growth as a person, and I know that until the end of my days, as several people have said to me in the preceding weeks, that we'll all be asking the question, what would Bill Kortum do in this situation? There are many more here, I know, who feel the same way. The third thing, activist politician. I had to use two words, please forgive me. Bill was involved in so many things, we will probably never really be able to list all the involvement and accomplishments. He went about his activism with a firm yet kind-hearted approach that endeared him even to his political adversaries. Bill showed up. Bill was well-informed when he showed up. And Bill was never afraid to add to the dialogue or insert his ideas into a city council or board of supervisors debate, write a letter supporting or admonishing a project or an intrusion into the commons, or have a difficult conversation with an elected official or bureaucrat who was seen as a problem. I often used to hear from people, when Bill Kortum calls, you answer. I was one of the few people who had a bit of a pass on that rule, and I know it frustrated the crap out of Bill at times. But it wasn't because I didn't want to hear his ideas and his lists. Bill always had a list for me. It was usually because I was bogged down in the 5 or 6 issues that he put on my plate last week, or that the board had conjured up, often at Bill's leadership in the past board meeting. But I did have the chance to tell him that I wasn't avoiding him before he passed them. I'm very grateful I got to say that to him. One time at a board meeting, excuse me, Bill presented an idea for describing the environmental accomplishments of the voting public. The adoption of the California Coastal Act, twice supporting quarter-cent sales tax for the protection of open space through our Sonoma County Ag Preservation and Open Space District, voter-adopted community separators, voter-supported sales tax to fund the Smart Rail and Trail project. I'll remind you, our environmental dean was the driving force for years behind the largest construction project the North Bay will see this side of the century, maybe longer. And scenic corridor south of Petaluma. This was Bill's agenda. Bill referred to this as the voter's green mandate. Well, we were all not very accepting of the concept of the time of calling it the voter's green mandate. Our gut reaction was that we can't say it's all good. We need to use urgency and action-oriented talk about the next fight. If you tell them it's over, they'll relax and we're in big trouble. Well, Bill, never being one to take no on an idea he knew had merit, continued to push and push, and eventually we came around and said, you might be onto something there, Bill. So for SCCA's 20th anniversary celebration back in 2011, we used the term Guardian of the Voters' Green Mandate to refer to our successes and our public successes that were enabled by grassroots activism and voter-approved measures and initiatives, all of which Bill Kortum had a strong hand in pushing forward, if not crafting. I've probably exceeded my time, so I'll wrap up with our great challenge is to continue Bill's legacy, the Voters' Green Mandate or the Kortum Green Mandate. We must work together to maintain the rural character, pristine landscapes, agrarian feel, coastal access, and ecological integrity of Sonoma County. Sonoma County Conservation Action is here to continue the fight, and we're very grateful to Bill and to all of you here for enabling us to keep that fight going. Finally, a couple days after Bill passed, Uniglass, who you're going to hear from in a little bit, and I were sharing some stories and tears and decided to invite some Coast Walk and SCCA folks out to Bodega Head to do a toast at the coast in Bill's memory. Mark Green, SCCA's former executive director and co-founder, introduced the idea of a park in Bill's name that we all thought had great merit. So, I cannot wait for us all to take a hike at Bill Kortum Regional Park at Leveque Ranch. Okay.
Thank you very much, Denny. John Crevelli is a retired Santa Rosa Junior College teacher of U.S. history, a longtime friend of Bill's, and one of the founding members of COAST, and also a founding member of the Over the Hill and Dale Hiking Club. John will speak about walks and talks with Bill Kortum. John Crevelli. You may want to come up here, John. That's a big step.
Try that. I met Bill Kortum 47 years ago at a meeting where Coast was born. My life changed as I became a charter member. I listened to his quiet persuasion presentation, so persuasive that I felt I had to be part of his camp. There was no one who could present facts with such clarity, no one who could present solutions and strategy so cogently, no one who embodied convictions and hope so persuasively. He was just a special human being. He was inspirational. I discovered we had something in common, mutual experiences. We were both born in Sonoma County, and we both had agricultural experiences. We both loved to hike, he on Sonoma Mountain, and I on every hill and mountain around Santa Rosa. I quickly learned that Bill had the same intense love of Sonoma County that I did. He was a kindred spirit, and I was looking for a mentor and guide. In the early 1990s, a hiking group of Santa Rosa Junior College retirees, we've heard the name already, the Over the Hill and Dale gang, began to include friends we knew in the environmental movement. What a pleasure it was having Bill Kortum along. The camaraderie was something that members looked forward to monthly. He was as eager as all of us to take the hikes. And on our hikes, Bill would be the presenter of information that we might not be up on yet. In fact, this became the focus of lunch hours on the trail. When we had to break up to walk in small groups or single file trails, he was a consummate listener on any topic, even the most trivial. He listened intently on even personal matters and offered observations. He knew much on every subject and had empathy to respond with kindness to even a slight mention of a personal problem. He was like a father. He understood what we might be feeling. His gentleness was calming. I often thought about the man who was so generous and decent, so basically humble, so generous. Where did that come from? He was too nice a person to be a traditional leader. But there were no rough edges, no pushiness. I knew the answer. Bill's strength and leadership came from within. His confidence in knowing he was right in his facts and conclusions and proposals. That he was right even if he was not always able to convince some who were motivated by personal rather than community-oriented goals. He was comfortable in his own skin and had an inner strength that would make him the most formidable leader. He was a teacher and brought most of the population to the position on issues that had not been accepted previously. It took 50 years, but his tenacity never wavered. You could see all that when you knew the man in public forums or out on a hike. He was a force. On that note, this historian wants to cry out to future generations who might not know the man as we have. I imagine myself in dialogue with a county citizen in the future. I would ask them, do you love the county? What is it that you love? Do you like Bodega Bay? Have you visited the Hole in the Head and know what happened there? Bill Kortum cut his teeth on that first environmental battle. Have you ever visited Salt Point State Park? His footprints are there. You should know he was behind it becoming the state park. Have you visited the Sonoma County trails through Sea Ranch? Have you heard or read about the creation of the organization Coast to fight the battle of access through Sea Ranch, and how the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors tried to deny the right of using an initiative to stop the giveaway of the people's rights of access? Do you know the powers that be in the county launched a vicious campaign to defeat the upstart environmental movement? You definitely need to learn about that. Have you heard of Proposition 20 that created the California Coastal Commission and has protected the coast for 50 years? Bill Kortum was responsible for that. Have you visited Jenner and enjoyed the beaches there? Do you know there was a plan to dredge the river to 70-foot depth from Jenner to beyond Highway 1 and on an 8,000-acre lease, build condos and homes and a sewage plant where a state park exists now, and dump the community's sewer waste into the ocean at Shell Beach? You need to know about that and the role Bill Kortum and Virginia Heckman played. Do you know there was a plan by the Sonoma County Water Agency to build an aqueduct from the Warm Springs Dam to the coast to provide water for the development of homes on the entire coast so we could become another Malibu of the North? Learn about that. Do you enjoy the more than 30,000 acres of open space on the California plain where wastewater is used to create green, verdant vistas we love to look at? You know that Bill Kortum fought for years to see wastewater used as a resource to save agriculture and open space, and that he blocked the plan to send the wastewater to the ocean through the Estero Americano and make Outer Bodega Bay a cesspool. Hey, you should know about that. It involves our health. Did you know that Bill Kortum was one of 2 members of Coast who were elected to the Board of Supervisors, and they were both recalled because they introduced ideas that would require a moratorium on lot splits while a general plan could be created? Environmentalists considered that the most shameful event in county history. It would be wise to know that in detail. Did you know that the most influential newspaper in the North Bay, the Press Democrat, took the side of the anti-environmentalists, and by tough editorial policies helped defeat every idea environmentalists proposed for about 10 years? You need to know about that. Have you heard of Sonoma County Land Trust? If not, look into it, as Bill served for 25 years on the board of directors. Look into that and learn how out of that would grow the idea of an agricultural and open space district. You know that Sonoma County was the first in the nation to create an agricultural preservation and open space district. But do you know that it was Bill's continual education of the public that finally succeeded in making citizens environmentally sensitive so they could tax themselves to create such a district? Delve deeper into the history of this man. Have you hiked the Kortum Trail along the coast? Did you know that Bill Kortum created Coast Walk, out of which came the idea of a coastal trail the length of the state, and the trail is nearing completion already? Put that on your to-do list. Have you heard of the California League of Conservation Voters, the oldest state political action committee? Bill was a charter member, and from that organized Sonoma County Conservation Action, which introduced door-to-door canvassing and continued his plan for sensitizing the public to the need to become politically involved if you love Sonoma County. You do, don't you? Love the county? Have you ridden the SMART train, which I understand has been a boon in alleviating some of the congestion on the highway corridor? Do you know there was an opposition to the idea? But Bill and a lot of others worked for years to get that through. He had hoped to live long enough to ride the first train, you know. And finally, there is Lafferty Ranch. Is that access issue still alive? Did you know that Bill Kortum spent 25 years on that problem and regretted that he would not live long enough to see a victorious achievement? Maybe you should finish that job after you have come up to speed on this man. That's the dialogue sort of one way that I imagine with the future. It was inspired by both Bill and Lucy, that magnificent couple. And I can honestly say in my almost 84 years in this county that they are the two people I most admire and respect. Well, a few months ago, Bill and Lucy told me that we needed to get the facts down on Bill's 50 years of activism, because people would soon forget. This outstanding human being will be remembered by every person in this room. There is no question. And I have tried to write that history down. But I charge everyone in this room, never forget the environmental story and keep telling it with Bill Kortum as the principal player and star of the story. And Bill, I believe your spirit is in this room. It is in all of us who so admired you. We will not give up on Lafferty, and we will tell your story forever. You will never be forgotten. We promise. We will never back down or give up. We love you.
Did you know that John Crevelli is quite a historian? That John Crevelli has written and would read at some of our lunchtime meetings a chapter in his book, The History of Sonoma County, which I keep chiding him to publish. We want to see that, John, before 84. A number of years ago, Gaye LeBaron wrote that Sonoma County was the cradle of coastal access and conservation. That being so, it was the hand of Bill Kortum who built and rocked that cradle. Una Glass is the executive director of Coast Walk and spends much of her time working to see the completion of the California Coastal Trail. She recently was elected to the Sebastopol City Council, and she'll talk to you today about the Coastal Trail and Bill Kortum.
I am so honored to be here today. I am so honored to be here today. I first met Bill Kortum in 1974 when he ran for Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, and I was a political science student at Sonoma State, crunching data for his campaign. I was 20, an adult in training, and Bill was a larger-than-life figure, a leader in the blossoming Sonoma County environmental movement. His presence and words asserted authority and intelligence. I was completely intimidated. Over the years, I ran into him at various events, but did not come to know him well for another 2 decades, when I joined the Board of Conservation Action. Then I came to know Bill as a friend, as a man of big ideas, a big picture kind of guy, a Renaissance man, an intellectual, a gentleman, and a man of principle. He was a mentor and a colleague. I enjoyed nothing more than brainstorming with Bill. He was unsurpassed as a strategist. Many of us here in Sonoma County tend to think of Bill as the man who, more than anyone else, saved the landscape of Sonoma County. But Bill's reach and influence extended far beyond the Sonoma County line. He was very prominent in the statewide coastal protection movement, working with John Dunlap, Alan Cerrotti, Peter Douglas, and others. First, as they unsuccessfully tried to pass a coastal protection bill in the California legislature, and then with a statewide alliance of 110 groups that launched Proposition 20, the coastal initiative that passed in 1972, the first time I voted. Bill's intense activism began around 1962 with PG&E's attempt to build a nuclear power plant at Bodega Head here in Sonoma County. Inspired by his brother Carl, Bill's opposition to the nuclear plant was rooted in his training as a scientist. Bill, a veterinarian, had read about radiation in milk and knew something about geology too. He knew a nuclear plant at ground zero of the San Andreas Fault would pose a real threat to health, not only for Sonoma County, but the entire Bay Area and beyond. Following on the heels of the Bodega fight came Sea Ranch, a proposed development that threatened to close 10 miles of coastline to the public. These two events motivated Bill to advocate for statewide remedies. The 1960s was a time of sweeping reform, a time when Bill and others believed that government can solve problems rather than the idea fashionable in Washington today that government is the problem. Bill recognized that sometimes centralized regulation on a large scale is the only effective way to ensure good public policy. The power of centralized state and federal authority can outweigh the provincial interests sometimes manifested by local decision makers. This was proven in civil rights legislation, the Clean Air and Water Acts, and the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency. Bill's work to pass Prop 20 and the Coastal Act did solve problems, saving our statewide coastline for generations to come and ensuring public access to our coastal commons. Bill and Lucy, with Tom and Vivian McFarling, founded Coastwalk, an organization with a statewide focus, in response to threats against coastal access. They, along with Richard and Brenda Nichols, Linda Haynes, and so many others, used Coastwalk, the organization I currently lead, to mobilize grassroots support for coastal protection and a statewide California coastal trail that would run from Oregon to Mexico. The trail, a clever, publicly popular idea that guarantees coastal public access, was dear to both Bill and his old friend Peter Douglas. Lucy recently told me that Bill rarely took the easy way, the line of least resistance. He strove for a better way, a way that made sense, a way that complied with facts and principles. You can see this in the home they built. While others were happy to purchase a set of standard blueprints, Bill set about creating a work of art, a home rooted in the landscape, the ideas he developed, the books he read. Bill had a ravenous mind. He attended lectures, read voraciously, brainstormed insatiably, and networked endlessly. Bill's work on local issues was always framed by global concepts and democratic principles. He was not one to just go with the flow. Through all his work, Lucy was at his side, a partner in strategy, a committed environmentalist in her own right. Building on his experience of statewide success, Bill joined the statewide board of the California League of Conservation Voters, and then founded Sonoma County Conservation Action in its image, recruiting CLCV staffer Mark Green to get it launched. He brought Peter Calthorpe to Sonoma County, injecting international ideas about transit and the built environment into the local vernacular. He pushed for urban growth boundaries, a publicly funded open space district, and a rail system for the North Bay. He believed that everyday people should define the direction of our society, not just the elite. He believed in grassroots organizing and good government. He believed in science and the rational mind and excellent education. He lobbied hard for his state college to be located near Cotati, and he got his way. He believed in a public commons, those things we own in common, and the right of the public from every economic background and every walk of life to access that commons. The air we breathe, the water that sustains our life, our parks, and our coastline. He was a gentleman to all, old-fashioned in his manner, always gracious, even when in disagreement. His enthusiasm was catching, and he often said, "Wow," in response to interesting news. He had a wonderful sense of humor, complimenting PG&E on the nice pond they built for the birds out at Bodega Head. I visited Bill a few days before he left us. He was not communicating much, lying in his hospital bed at home with his eyes closed. I held his hand, whispered some thoughts, and finally said, "Don't worry, Bill. You have taught us well. We will follow your example. We will keep up the fight for our commons and for our planet, and we will finish the California Coastal Trail." He opened his eyes and looked at me and smiled and said, "Yes."
Most of us remember Bill Kortum as an environmental activist first class, but he did have a job. Following graduation from Petaluma High School, Bill attended Santa Rosa Junior College for 2 years and then transferred to the University of California at Davis, where he graduated as a student of veterinary medicine. He established the Cotati Veterinary Clinic and specialized in dairy cattle. His longtime friend and colleague, Gene Harlan, will speak about Bill Kortum, the veterinarian.
Thank you. I'm humbled to be here, invited by the family to speak about all of our good friend, Dr. Kortum. Bill spent 4 years in the Merchant Marine before he attended the actually second class of the veterinary school at University of California. In that class, actually in several of those first classes, most of the students were war veterans. And I think some of the professors were younger than their students. But one of my big disappointments about 2013 was there was a class reunion for veterinary students at Davis for 1953, 1963, and 1973. And I'm actually a graduate of 1973, and I was really hoping that Bill could make that reunion because I wanted to show Bill off. Unfortunately, he didn't make it, and I know he would have enjoyed that. So after Bill graduated from college, he went into the veterinary corps for a couple of years, and he actually saw another famous local veterinarian by the name of Al Bettman, and he asked Dr. Bettman, he says, "I'm thinking about starting a practice in Cotati. What do you think?" He said, "You'll go broke." And sure enough, Cotati Vet is still there, and next year will be 60 years. So a favorite term today of most conservationists is sustainability. I would say that Cotati Vet is sustainable, and I think with Bill's input and his foresight, hopefully it will last another 60 years. That's my hope and goal. And I've been there just a short time, so this is my 41st year. I felt real privileged to go on my first call in private practice with Dr. Kortum, and it was a famous dairyman by the name of Jim Elmarini. And of course, there were several cows to check there and a few lame cows. So Bill was a real wise man. He checked the cows, and the young guy did the lame cows by jacking their leg up and hanging them from the ceiling and working on the lame cows. But one of my big regrets was he said to me, he said, "Do you have any IUIs?" And if any of you have been around the tables, you can see the IUI that he developed in the, I believe, the early 60s. And it was an intrauterine infuser to help prevent metritis in cows and increase their fertility. And I had just finished an internship in reproduction, and so I'm feeling really bad because I didn't have any in the truck, and I'd inherited the truck that Bill had driven. So I kind of feel I had a connection, but no IUIs. And did he make me feel bad even though I did? He said no. He said, is the university not using these very much? So, I mean, typical Bill, right? His first associate veterinarian was Dr. Fred Groverman, and Dr. Groverman's here today. And I know all of you know Bill. Their first practice vehicle was a Volkswagen Bug. They'd taken the back seat out and had all their calf pullers and everything in the Volkswagen Bug, and they shared it. Not only that is between calls, here's Dr. Kortum again and his visionary. He had designed the small animal clinic, and they built that between calls with the help of Mr. Bill Croft, who is the business manager for many, many years. I always said, and I think Lucy will agree with this, the two smartest things that Dr. Kortum did was marry Lucy and hire Bill Croft as the business manager. Actually, Lucy and Bill lived on the property at 8079 Gravenstein Highway when they started the practice. And if you've been by the hospital, there's a little nursery next door, the Sumagawa nursery. That was their house. So I know all the children remember being raised actually on the practice property, because there was a tree house there that I know Bill built for the children, and that kind of continued on his building. He was a visionary in veterinary medicine. In 1953, it was real common to be what we would call a fire engine practice, where you're going out for emergencies. Bill saw beyond that. He saw the importance of herd health, of fertility exams, of mastitis control. And essentially, he gave his services away to make that happen. And we, as the following veterinarians, it made us easy for us because we weren't selling those programs. He'd already sold them because our clients saw the advantage of those economically and health-wise for the herd. It was always hard for me to understand. So I came in 1974. That's when Bill was elected as supervisor. So I didn't get to see him a lot in practice, but I've heard lots of stories from Mr. Croft, and Dr. Mangini is here today also, and Dr. Groverman. And I just feel fortunate that he had the foresight. And I think one of the things is he was the first veterinary practice to incorporate. There's been, in the state of California, there's been several changes over the years. The buy-sell agreement, I think, was always real fair. So that's one of the reasons you don't see large animal practices last this long. And I think it's Bill's foresight for that. He set up many programs. One of the ones that he talked about to me was there was a real problem with heel flies. So he took a valley where the heel flies were kind of contained, and he set up a program to treat all the cows in that county. And there was a product that came along about 30 years later that did a really good job of eliminating heel flies, and that's ivermectin. And so we don't deal with the heel flies. The heel flies would chase the cows. Actually, they didn't bite, but it was the noise that they ran from. So invariably, we'd see cows that had been run through a fence and cut their udders, and so it was a real concern. And Bill was looking at a better solution back in the 50s to solve that problem. Now 90% of our dairies in Sonoma County are organic, so the heel flies are back, and we wish Bill was here to help solve that problem. I think Bill's kind and gentle ways came essentially from being a veterinarian. You have to be kind and gentle because the animals know before you even walk in the corral or the pen. And I think that carried on without his life. I just want to thank the family, and I know we're all going to miss Bill.
Gaye LeBaron, the longtime press Democrat columnist and Sonoma County historian, has probably written at one time or another about most of Bill's environmental and political accomplishments and or defeats. Heritage roads, and other topics will be her assignment today. Gaye.
Thank you, Peter. And it's an honor just to know Bill Kortum. All right, louder it is. I said it's an honor just to know Bill Kortum. And it's a very great honor to be asked to share my memories. I would like to call your attention to the first few minutes of a video that Bill set for in 2006. No one has ever come as well prepared for a history video than Bill did that day. He brought an outline, about 4 or 5 pages. not so much of his life, but of the issues that had been and still were at that point very important to him. Now, as you might imagine, this video, this outline actually, proved to be a history of environmentalism in Sonoma County up to that point. But apart from this well-organized list of projects, as he called them, in those first few minutes, Bill tells his life story, really, in a very few words. Relaxed, leaning back with his legs stretched out in front of him, he smiled as he talked about being born in Petaluma, about his parents being raised in Calistoga, where he said, and this is a quote, "They had the freedom to roam the countryside, to go anywhere, climb fences, explore the landscape. My dad always said to me, you're going to lose that in your lifetime." So Bill was quick to roam himself. "All the hills around Petaluma saw our presence," he said. And that freedom, this is still a quote, that sense of open space gave me a sense of ownership. I felt that I owned the landscape and the ability to have access to it, he said. That has been a very central value system for me. Bill's ownership was not proprietary, it was inclusive. He not only owned it, he convinced us all that we owned it too. And what great value there has been in that. I don't know that I've ever known anyone more secure and settled in his life mission than Bill Kortum. His story has a multitude of firsts in it. You've heard a lot of them here today already. His first civic project, as he called it, was the Cotati Plaza, which was nothing more, he said, than a field of dry grass when he and Lucy, as he put it again, decided to go it alone and open their veterinary practice in the town that he described as a crossroads. Cotati historian Prue Draper remembers that his role in the town's development, not stopping with the hexagonal plaza, as the president of the Chamber of Commerce, he led the drive that as we've heard, put Sonoma State where it is. And when Rohnert Park incorporated as a city, he organized the effort that made Cotati a city too, to protect that little town's identity. And if Cotati was his first project, I want to say a word or two about one of his last projects. And I say one because I know he had more than one at a time, always. And that would be the plan that Peter has referred to, the Heritage Roads. Several years ago, he enlisted John LeBaron, who, like Bill, was a native son, another member of the Over the Hill and Dale gang, and who had grown up driving the scenic back roads that connect the corners of this county. They drove them together, Bill and John, roads with names that are kind of like poetry or folk music, like Tin Barn and Red Winery and Hauser Bridge. And John made the photos and Bill wrote the proposal asking that these roads be protected from being made into something more like highways. There are things more important than getting somewhere fast. The Heritage Roads proposal still awaits county approval. And like Bill, you know how that goes. First project, last project, and so very many in between. Such a legacy. Last Saturday, I was on my front porch talking to a neighbor, and I mentioned that I had been making notes for Bill's memorial. And there was a man high on a ladder over our heads who was pruning my roofline rose bushes. And he stopped and he looked down. And he said, "The community owes that man a great big thank you." Now, that rose pruner had never met Bill Kortum, but he knew him nonetheless. And he knew that we'd all been drawn into Bill's community, which had moved way beyond the Cotati Plaza to encompass all of this county and much of the California coast. Such a life he led, this owner of our landscape, and I thank you for the privilege.
Matt Maguire is a very long-time friend of Bill's. Yesterday when we were setting up, I was watching. Matt was doing work, and the ladies were doing most of the work. But Matt said to me, "How long have you known Bill?" And I said, I really don't know. And Matt said, I don't remember when I met him either. We both realized we didn't go to high school with him. But we've known him for, it seems like, at least those many years. Matt is a former city councilman in the city of Petaluma. He's a friend of Lafferty, and of course he's a friend of the Kortums. He might talk a little bit about gardening and other things about Bill Kortum. Matt Maguire.
The Bill Kortum I know was a hard-hearted, steely-eyed cutthroat, ruthless in the pursuit of his goals. He would let nothing get in the way when he was intent upon crushing his enemies. And when he did obliterate his opponents, he would raise his croquet mallet high in triumph and laugh like a kid, grinning that great grin of his. Bill loved croquet and built his own court. It was one of his prides and joy, painstakingly manicured to a velvety finish. It was one of the many non-political interests he had, as you can see if you've looked at the displays here today. He was one hell of a croquet player with amazing aim and excellent skills, and boy, did he relish his victories. Of course, for those of us who felt the sting of defeat, and I was pretty consistently one of them, there was the compensation of then enjoying one of Lucy's fine home-cooked meals, served with Bill's own delicious Pinot Noirs or Zinfandels. There at his dining table, we would talk about friends and foes, books, local history, trips and families, and so much more. And, of course, politics. Who in office was being a knucklehead and who was doing a good job. Bill's many meetings, the latest on multiple issues, and what fights were looming. As Peter said, I don't actually remember when I first met Bill. It was over a quarter of a century ago, and maybe it was during the Factory Outlet Mall battle, or maybe it was when I was Jane Hamilton's campaign manager. I do remember that every time he popped up, he was saying and doing the right things. He was on the same side of the issues I was on always, but he was always way ahead of me. As I got to know Bill, we shared many interests beyond the political: hiking, gardening, love of the land, good wine and dinners, carpooling, theater shows, the weather and rainfall, comparing strawberries, sharing his tomatoes, many, many tomatoes. Bill was a very generous man. The last hike I took with Bill was with his son Sam and his family up on Lafferty Ranch. This was just last spring, and although he was under treatment for his cancer, he easily made it to the top. What a day we had, soaking up the views, enjoying the beauty, recalling our long history with the place. I almost didn't go as I had other business that day, but when Bill called to see if I could refresh him on the best trail routes, trying to describe them was difficult, and it dawned on me that this would be a great opportunity to spend time with Bill and family. And I was pleased and honored to act as guide. He never complained about being sick. He'd tell you he might be having a bad day if you asked, but he avoided such talk. He did express frustration with the chemo that dulled his mind and made him so tired. And that was hard for him as he wanted to be out in his garden or working on various tasks. But to the very end, he used every bit of his discretionary energy to continue his work. That was so typical of Bill. In our last conversation after he came home from the hospital, he perked right up when I updated him on the latest Lafferty details. I was there with his daughter Julie, and when she asked him if there were any particular places in the county he might like to have his ashes spread, he laughed when I suggested we sprinkle some in the supervisor's chambers. Such grace. Such a wonderful man, so agreeable. Bill's imprint on Sonoma County and much of California really is so profound and so ubiquitous, it seems impossible to carry on without him. From ag preservation to water issues, Bill was there. Like my friend Sherry Cardo says, he was like a giant redwood tree, standing above everyone else, seeing farther into the distance and the future than the rest of us. So losing him feels like losing a part of the Sonoma landscape, like the very sky or the wind. And now, how can we carry on when we think of his wonderful smile and that nimbus of white hair, and we feel such a great loss? How do we fill Bill's giant shoes? He would tell us, with lots and lots of our little feats. Not those things at the ends of our legs, but feats of activism, feats of civic participation, feats of environmental protection. So to carry on Bill's legacy, of course, we should support conservation action and Coast Walk and SMART and all the rest. But you could also take up Bill's last great unfinished battle and help us get Lafferty Ranch open. Let your supervisor know that if the mediation process we are currently engaged in does not deliver the results in the next several months, that it's time for the county to join our access suit. That will quickly resolve the access issue, and that opens the door to many more options for funding, for the city to move ahead with park plans, and for people to start seeing what a magnificent property they own. Bill would thank you for that. And someday we will have what I hope will be called the Bill Kortum Regional Park at Lafferty Ranch and see his dream come true. So may the spirits take good care of our friend Bill Kortum, for Bill Kortum took such good care of us.
It has been alluded to that the Kortums have been involved in winemaking. Gaye Voyvodich is a part of the Kortum winemaking team, and her topic is Red Wines of 180 Eli Road. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. When I was first asked to talk about Bill and wine, I thought, wow, I am so lucky to be speaking about something that was such a personal passion of Bill's. But how is it possible to speak about this without including everyone who was ever an important part of his winemaking community? And then I thought, why would his passion of winemaking even be important to talk about here when Bill was such an extraordinary environmental leader and visionary on so many fronts? And then it occurred to me, the fact that he was a visionary and a leader actually might be the exact reason why winemaking played such an important part in Bill's life. Churchill painted to clear his head. Colin Powell repaired cars. Brian O'Neill, this former head of the Golden Gate National Park System, made stained glass windows. And to counter head time and long, difficult fights for the good of the environment, Bill not only was a great woodworker, but he made wine. Winemaking is very tangible and almost always has a positive outcome that is immediately followed by a celebration. Over the course of 10 years, you get to know the people you're making wine with pretty well. Bill organized and relied on us. Lucy and Les and Paul and Will and Johnny and Alexandra and Mike and Dwayne and Mark and Andrea and Michael and Diana and Miles and Zoe and Kelly and many, many, many others. We were the physical labor and got dozens of things done. In fact, it almost seems that the community part of winemaking for Bill was the most important part of the whole process. But then, community building was something Bill was really good at. Bill was a seat-of-the-pants winemaker, as some will say, But anybody around him became imbued with the same passion for his making wine. He was even-keeled. He welcomed new ideas. He was a wonderful motivator, but he could be a pain in the neck about it too. But then no task was ever too small for him to do either. Around the winemaking workday meals, he would ask everybody what they thought about doing something this way or that way, and in the process, engaging us in these ideas and these decisions. And ultimately, this group of volunteers started changing into a real community. Sometimes the gods of fertility looked down on us and providing us banner harvests, and sometimes they did not. Vineyards were sold, volunteers came and went, new vintages and techniques were tried, but Bill loved all the madness that led to ecstasy, the wine. Bill grew up in Calistoga, and Bill's dad, Max, of course, had a major influence on his decision to fight for open space. But it's also interesting to note that Bill's great-grandfather, Louis Kortum, was making wine in Calistoga before Prohibition shut him down. Was Bill influenced with the stories he heard around the table to make wine himself? And is all this sounding very familiar? Like so many other things Bill was passionate about. He created a community, and that community became our little winemaking family, which turned into good friends and our own winemaking passions. For me, working beside Bill in the vineyards or in the dairy-turned wine barn felt like tapping into life from another era. This was something our grandfathers and our grandfathers' grandfathers did too. Picking, crushing, pressing, and fermenting those sweet little herbs into an intoxicating elixir was as natural as breathing. Okay, this still left me with the issue of how to tell you the story of Bill making wine, a hobby that he kept up for at least the last 35 years and continued up into only a few months ago. I decided the only way to do this right was through photographs. So I made a short movie slideshow to share with you about Bill's winemaking on Ely Hill. And it will be shown on this event screen after this. God preventing, hopefully, we can get the videos working. So after, I know Frank is speaking next, please grab a glass of something, bring it here, and watch a little winemaking movie, and give Bill a toast for the fruits of all of his efforts. We are forever grateful for being a part of this magic. And I agree with the wow. This is Bill. Wow!
Hundreds of folks have called Bill Kortum their friend, but only 3 have ever called him Dad. Frank Kortum, the eldest of the Kortum children, will talk about Bill Kortum, my dad.
Thanks, Peter. It's been great to hear how Dad influenced and inspired so many people over the years. I'd like to take a few minutes to share some family memories. Memories with you, but some memories I think you may recognize. Dad loved being part of an extended family. As kids, Julie, Sam, and I saw the obvious mutual respect that between Dad and his brother Carl and his sister Maxine. He closely followed their accomplishments and learned from their epic stories of confrontations with library and museum bureaucracies. And I believe that affection in Dad's generation is a big reason that Julie, Sam, and I get along so well today. But Dad actually enjoyed learning from people of all ages, and so he took an active interest in the lives of younger family members. For example, at Thanksgiving this past year, grandson Dylan recently remembered, as we all do, the extended dinner conversations that were a big part of life at Ely Hill. But what Dylan also remembered was how Dad's curiosity was such a big part of those conversations. And that memory rang true to me as well. Personally, I remember that from time to time, Dad would throw a legal question my way, an obscure legal question. He was always so appreciative if I was able to find an answer, far more than any client that I've ever known. Dad was also a big part of the life of his youngest grandson, Mark, who's 11. Mark remembers that when they would work on a project, Dad would always let Mark drive the tractor. And this is actually profound insight that I'll come back to in a few minutes. Mark also noticed that Dad set a good example by quoting Mark here, not starting something until he finished the projects he was working on. I remember that often finishing a project on Eli Hill with Dad would involve working in the fading light while dinner was waiting, but we all remember the satisfaction that came from the job well done. And Mark also saw how Dad was able to work on his own. As active as Dad was with other people, it wasn't always phone calls and emails and meetings. In the quiet hours at Eli Hill, Dad could often be found reading and writing, always learning something, always figuring out a better strategy. And of course, he loved spending time in his garden, where he did some of his best thinking. And the bonus for all of us was lots and lots of tomatoes. Dad also had a playful side, as Matt Maguire has mentioned, and as Chuck Aurelia, who's here today, said, to see him playing croquet was to see him enjoy life to the fullest. But as competitive as he was on the croquet court, he always took time to help people who were just learning the game, especially the kids. Now, if much of this sounds familiar to you, that may be because of Dad's genuine interest in other people drew them in turn to his projects and causes. As Neil Fishman said, he would always make you feel like you were the only one that knew enough or who had the right connections. And as other people have mentioned, his enthusiasm and passion for his projects and causes was infectious and inspirational. But Dad also believed in letting other people take responsibility and the credit for doing what they did best. He was always ready to let someone else drive the tractor. And he was never diminished by the inevitable setbacks he encountered along the way. He was always ready for the next challenge. As he would say, when one battle is over, the next battle is just beginning. And with each battle, he looked forward to the intense conversations at Eli Hill about strategy, and conversations who would often move from the dinner table out to the croquet court. Finally, Dad admired the non-conforming and the unconventional. As Dylan so eloquently stated in his Thanksgiving message, what made Dad different and what makes Dylan different are the things that matter the most. I'd like to suggest one more reason why Dad had such an influence on lives both within his family and beyond, and that would be the generosity of spirit that characterized the life that Mom and Dad shared and that helped create the great community we have gathered here today. And I know that Julie, Sam, and I, as geographically dispersed as we are, felt better knowing that he had so many great friends nearby. And we feel better now knowing that Mom will be part of that great community still. Now, Dad certainly wasn't right about everything, but I know that he was right about all of you. And so I thought about concluding with what Joe Hill, the labor organizer from the early 1900s, said shortly before his death. He said, "Don't mourn, organize." But then I realized you guys have been well organized for a long time. So perhaps we can learn from something that was said about Robin Williams recently. And I know Robin Williams and Bill Kortum weren't often mentioned in the same sentence. But in fact, Robin Williams spent a lot of time working behind the scenes on charitable activities, and one of the many people who admired him for that said, "Don't grieve Robin, be Robin." And so I say, don't grieve Bill Kortum, be Bill Kortum. And I know that many of you, all of you, will carry on that tradition of activism and generosity and will be Bill Kortum. Thank you.
Chris Sampson and his group are going to lead the Bill Kortum Memorial crowd, that's you, in singing "This Land Is Your Land." And following the singing of "This Land Is Your Land," of course, there will be refreshments, croquet, of course, out here. Go past the Kortum Trail, out that door, and conversations with the family and others. All right. Now, everybody sing up.
Are we okay here? When I was asked to sing this song, I was struck by the lyrics written by Woody Guthrie 70 years ago, how much they spoke to Bill and his love of the land, and hiking on it and preserving it for everyone to enjoy. Please sing along. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As the sun was shining and I was strolling, and the wheat fields flashing and the dust clouds rolling, as the fog was lifting, a voice was chanting, this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking, I saw a sign there, and on that sign it said no trespassing, and on the other side it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me.